The scientist stumbled through the dimly lit halls of the underwater research facility, his heart pounding in his chest. He had volunteered for the experiment, eager to be a part of something groundbreaking, but now he was regretting his decision. The experiment was meant to transfer his consciousness into a machine body, but something had gone wrong. He felt like he was losing his mind, haunted by hallucinations and memories that weren't his own. As he stumbled through the first few rooms of the facility, he felt a growing sense of unease. The equipment around him was flashing and sparking, the sound of tearing metal echoing through the halls. The machines that were once state-of-the-art now seemed to be malfunctioning, their mechanical arms flailing wildly as they tried to complete their assigned tasks. The scientist tried to call out for help, but his voice was lost in the din of the chaos. He was completely alone, a stranger in a world gone mad. The darkness seemed to be closing in around him, threatening to swallow him whole. He soon realized that the experiment had not just gone wrong, but had failed in the most catastrophic of ways. The transfer of his consciousness into the machine body had not been successful, and now his mind was trapped in this underwater nightmare, with no escape in sight. As he pressed on, the scientist was plagued by a growing sense of terror. He was caught between two worlds, a prisoner in his own mind, unable to distinguish reality from the horrors that haunted him. It had all gone wrong, and now he was paying the price. The scientist continued his journey through the facility, his senses increasingly distorted. The machines around him seemed to be alive, their movements taking on an almost malevolent quality. They seemed to be reaching out to him, their mechanical arms twisted and bent in ways that were impossible. He was tormented by hallucinations, the memories of those who had come before him flickering in and out of focus. The faces of the other subjects loomed large in his mind, their expressions twisted with pain and fear. He couldn't tell what was real and what was a figment of his imagination, and he was consumed by a sense of dread. The scientist began to encounter machines that were unlike anything he had seen before. They were twisted and mutated, as if they had been altered in ways that were beyond comprehension. The machines were seemingly sentient, their movements erratic, and their functions unknown. He was overcome by a sense of fear and bewilderment, unable to understand what was happening to him. As he made his way deeper into the facility, the scientist was faced with a series of obstacles, each one more difficult and perplexing than the last. He was forced to navigate through a maze of twisted machines and endless hallways, always searching for a way out but never finding one. The hallucinations grew stronger and more vivid, threatening to consume him entirely. The scientist was caught in a never-ending cycle of horror and confusion, his mind and body pushed to the brink of exhaustion. He was trapped in a nightmare from which there seemed to be no escape. The machines that had once been the key to his salvation were now his greatest enemies, their twisted forms mocking him at every turn. The scientist came upon a room that was filled with canvases, paint, and brushes. It was clear that the room had once belonged to an artist, but now it was abandoned and left to rot. The canvases were covered in incomplete paintings, the brushstrokes frantic and unsettling. As he approached the paintings, the scientist was struck by a feeling of déjà vu. The images before him seemed familiar, but he couldn't quite place why. The more he looked at the paintings, the more he realized that they were not just random brushstrokes, but images of his own memories and hallucinations. The artist had captured his deepest fears and nightmares in his artwork, painting them with a level of detail that was almost too real. The scientist was horrified to discover that the artist was none other than himself. He was trapped in an endless loop, reliving the same horrors over and over again. The paintings represented his own descent into madness, his mind unraveling before his very eyes. The more he looked at the paintings, the more he realized that the artist had not just painted his own fears, but the fears of the other subjects who had come before him. The paintings were a record of their descent into madness, their minds trapped in the underwater facility just as his own was. The scientist was consumed by a sense of hopelessness and despair. He was trapped in a nightmare with no escape, his own mind the source of his greatest fears. The mad artist's paintings represented not just his own fear, but the fear of all those who had come before him, each one descending into madness just as he had. The scientist was consumed by a sense of hopelessness and despair. He was trapped in a nightmare with no escape, his own mind the source of his greatest fears. The mad artist's paintings represented not just his own fear, but the fear of all those who had come before him, each one descending into madness just as he had. As the scientist continued his journey through the facility, he became more and more unhinged. His mind was consumed by thoughts of death and despair, the hallucinations growing stronger with each passing moment. He was pushed to the brink of madness, his sanity slowly slipping away. He stumbled upon the source of the experiments that had led him to this underwater facility, a massive machine that pulsed with a sickly light. The machine was designed to upload human consciousness into artificial bodies, preserving the memories and personalities of the subjects for eternity. But something had gone wrong, and the subjects had become trapped in a never-ending nightmare. The scientist approached the machine, his mind consumed by a sense of dread. He reached out to touch the machine, his fingers brushing against its cold metal surface. In that moment, he was overcome by a final burst of fear and desperation. The machine activated, uploading his consciousness into an artificial body. But instead of finding salvation, the scientist was consumed by madness. The horrors of the underwater facility, the twisted machines, the mad artist's paintings, and his own descent into insanity all merged into one final, terrifying crescendo. The scientist's consciousness was trapped in the artificial body, his mind consumed by madness and despair. He was no longer a human, but a machine, his soul trapped in a never-ending nightmare. He was the final victim of the experiment gone wrong, his mind and body lost to the horrors of the underwater facility. The scientist was doomed to wander the facility forever, a haunting presence in the twisted maze of machines and hallucinations. He was the final testament to the dangers of playing with the boundaries of life and death, his mind and body lost to the horrors of the underwater facility. Thank you for listening to this story. Until next time.